Hi, everyone. Welcome. We've got people trickling in, so we're just about to start the program, but welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Again, we're here for People Plus Places. It is our program focused again on moving older and historic buildings on the move, historic house relocation project. So thank you for being part of it. We have a really great lineup today. We've got a dynamic in terms of a group of panelists and folks to talk about this issue of moving houses. We also will have, I think, a unique opportunity to be actually on the site of one of the houses that's currently being disassembled as we speak right now. So we're going to be able to show you that a little bit. Especially when there's some action happening. So that will happen a little more organically during the next hour. So that's coming up as well. We've got panelists from different backgrounds and expertise in this field and that are taking on this project with the Historic House Relocation Project. And then also to talk a little bit about the history of house moving, especially in Los Angeles and its origin story and people that have been involved. So we've got folks like Brad Chambers, Evan Chambers, not related, Morgan Sykes, Jay Bush, and Rodney Kamerer. And we'll talk more about kind of each one of those. And I'm going to be moderating the session today. I am the president and CEO for the Los Angeles Conservancy. Again, thank you for being part of this. Thank you for taking part in our People Plus Places. And I would also encourage you, if you have questions, we're going to have time at the end of the event to go ahead and put them in the Q&A box rather than put them into the chat so we can keep track of those. And we'll try to get to as many as possible within the time frame that we have here with us today, and knowing that we have a lot of things to cover. Let me start by first of all saying our series People Plus Places, this is our 5th year of doing this program, and it's all about people-based, human-centric heritage conservation efforts, and essentially us sharing their stories. And so we do these programs with the idea to make them available, make them free, and to cover lots of different stories about LA County and what's happening. So I would encourage you to check out past programs. They're on our YouTube channel. This program will be up there very soon as well. So please tune in for some of the other things that we've got going on. And while we do these programs for free and open them to everybody, we also encourage you, if you're not already, to become a member of the Los Angeles Conservancy and join our 4,500 plus members, get our new magazine Landmark that we just recently launched, including our new issue that's just come out, I believe, this week, that's focused on our Community Leadership Bootcamp program. It's just another great way to be connected to the Conservancy. And for those that are members, thank you. We appreciate the support and for everything that you do and being a part of what we're doing. So let me start by giving a little bit of context, because I realize we've got a lot of things to throw into today's program, but I want to start with the idea that moving historic buildings, older buildings, it's nothing new, although we don't see it as much as we used to. But LA's been doing this for many times, many years, many decades. What's changed is the circumstances in terms of how it's more challenging today or more difficult and sometimes infeasible in terms of doing the relocation. And we'll get into some of those specifics about why that's the case. What has really changed and what we're talking about today is the recent Palisades and Eaton wildfires. And as tragic as those events are, they also now offer both open space and also people wanting to get back into their homes as quickly as possible, and also to have homes that have the kind of character and qualities that older and historic homes offer that you often don't get through new construction. And also with the idea to be able to be back in a home in the Altadena community and hopefully more affordable. So that is really at the heart of what this is all about. The idea of moving a home, I just stress that it's always the last resort. It's not the first thing that you should be looking at. And the case with what we're talking about today are really houses that are already destined for demolition. And this is giving them a second life in terms of looking at doing this. But again, LA has a long history of this in terms of moving houses out of harm's way. 2 examples here are from the freeway construction in terms of making sure that the houses were saved while we're still building our freeways, which is certainly an LA landscape all of its own. And you also see here, and we'll talk a little bit more about people wanting to stay in their houses even as they move, including a house moving party, which we will highlight a little bit later. We're also going to talk about really one of the LA's literal movers and shakers in the house moving business, and that's George Kress and the Kress House Moving Company. He worked all over LA County, in Windsor Square, in downtown Los Angeles, and Compton, was really prolific in terms of what he did. He moved just about everything and anything, including severing on the right here, right side image here, severing and removing about a 10-foot segment from the commercial exchange building and then putting it back together. So he was quite talented, quite skilled. And again, while he made a huge impact, actually few know his story. So we've got someone here that's going to join us that will be able to tell that story. And we're also hoping to, again, change that perspective. More people should know about George Kress and his contributions to LA. But if you look at LA, we were moving buildings, including an apartment building in the 1940s and 50s. We were also moving houses in the 1960s. In this case, it's part of urban renewal in the Bunker Hill area in terms of literally lifting them off the site. It's also in many ways the early formative days of the preservation movement in Los Angeles in terms of people starting to recognize, why are we throwing these buildings away? Why are we losing these buildings unnecessarily? We should be keeping them. And if that calls for moving them, that's a better result than demolition. So that's an early part of what we are doing. And while the methods of moving buildings hasn't changed all that much over time, you'll see what we're looking at today with the Historic House Relocation Project. It's a little different in terms of the way the house is being separated and some form of deconstruction. And there's reasons for that, mostly that it's being moved a very long distance in terms of actually going to a different community. So we'll talk more about the methods, what does it look like, and the challenges and the difficulties that you encounter with trying to move an existing older and historic building, and how that has evolved over time. But again, LA always moves buildings. Here you have an example of a couple of houses from about 16 years ago that were moved in the Pico Union neighborhood to save them from demolition and to move them onto a vacant lot. And here they were in midstream. Here they are today. In terms of these two houses have been fully rehabilitated, they're back into use, and it's a great save. And it also puts that neighborhood back together instead of having a big gap with a vacant lot. And here's a more recent example from Boyle Heights, a historic home that was moved out of the way so some multifamily housing could be built. This house hasn't been rehabilitated yet, so this is still a work in progress in terms of this particular house. And that brings us to where we are today in terms of the Historic House Relocation Project. This is really, again, being led by Omgivning Architecture and leaders there. And we'll talk to some of those folks today. And we're really appreciative of this, taking on this project and really championing this in terms of the idea of let's move buildings. And again, to do it to meet the needs, specifically in the Altadena community and for homeowners that have been impacted. And in many ways, it's kind of a matchmaking process of matching existing homes that are already threatened and planned for demolition, mostly through redevelopment, and how to match those with homeowners that are looking for a house that lost it in the fire, and to put those two things together. In both instances, again, these houses were already targeted for demolition. So rather than them being lost, this is a great way to keep the buildings and repurpose them, in this case, in an entirely different community. This house, one of the houses, this is at 2919 St. George Street. This is in Los Feliz, a large early 20th century craftsman style house. What's unique about this particular house is this will be the second time it has been relocated. This is where the house was and how it looked in around 1948. This is one of the houses that was moved out of the way because of the 101 freeway construction. And I mentioned before, sometimes in LA's history, and I've seen this in other communities, people want to make a party out of moving a house, sometimes to watch a house going down the street. In this particular case, the owner wanted to throw a party inside the house, to be in the house while it moved down the street. And so about 150 folks in the house had quite the party. They all signed a waiver to say no liability in case anything went wrong. And they apparently, from all indications, had a grand time. And I have to say, looking at this lady's expression says everything in terms of the party that was there. And this is the house as it looked when it was moved in 1948, probably around 1949. And this is what the house looked like until just recently. This is what it looked like about a month ago as the project was happening in terms of disassembly, deconstruction, and starting to cut the house into pieces for its relocation. It has lovely details inside, great, beautiful craftsman details that it really makes a lot of sense to be keeping this than throwing it away. And you can see as the house is being readied for its move in terms of the chimney being removed, all the interior details are all being saved and stored within the house. They will move within the house on the first floor as well. And as you can see here, and we'll talk more about this, is being cut up into different sections in terms of the move itself. They will all go onto a flatbed truck in terms of the relocation. And this one is very close to being actually moved itself. So that's happening. The second house we're going to highlight today, and unfortunately we have the homeowner that is taking on this house or adopting it from Altadena, Evan Chambers, and this is a great little craftsman bungalow in Hollywood that was also set for demolition as part of a proposed housing, multifamily housing project on the site and adjacent lots. Also has great details inside, built-ins, and the intent is to strip this all back to the original wood once it gets relocated to its new location. And you can see here, very similar to the other approach in the other house, it's being disassembled. Pieces are being numbered so they can be put back together once it's on its new location and foundation. And this is the house that we should be able to highlight a little bit today as the work is happening. The dormer just came off about 15 minutes ago, was craned off, and the porch is going to happen very shortly as well. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen there. And we're going to go into, and until pressing happens with the porch coming off, we'll break into that. But we're going to go into talking a little bit about George Kress and his history. But let me introduce the gentleman that's going to share a little bit more about him. This is, and Rodney, if you want to go ahead and turn on your camera, Rodney Kamerer. He's an author, he's a preservationist, he's a car aficionado, longtime friend of the Conservancy, and he's a collector of all things George Crest related, including the archive for the Kress House Moving Company. So let me see if I can get George or Rodney on the screen here.
It's been disabled.
We can hear you, Rodney. Are you able to turn on your camera?
We're trying.
Oh, I can see you. Perfect.
Oh, you can?
I can.
Oh, okay. And you can hear me and see me.
I can hear you. Thank you so much for joining. We appreciate it.
I'm glad you told me George, you know?
I know. Well, you know everything about George Kress, and that's the point. So I wanted to we're going to share a little bit with the folks tuning in. What you know a lot about George Kress and the Kress House Moving Company and their contributions to moving buildings all over LA County. Can you share a little bit about him and the important role he played in especially early 20th century Los Angeles?
Right. Well, I mean, this is right time, right place. Kress moved to Los Angeles from Pittsburgh in about 1915. In 1910, the population of LA was about 320,000 people, which, by the way, was exactly the number of people that were in the parking lot at Trader Joe's on Saturday. So, you know, the city has gone from that to 12 million today, or 13 million, but it was doubling, almost doubling every decade. And so the city was expanding just so rapidly that people could not keep up with it. So he was at the right place at the right time. He had learned the house moving business as a sort of an apprentice with his brother in Pittsburgh for 10, 15 years. And then saw the opportunity in Los Angeles and moved out. He began, you have to, the biggest thing to really understand about Kress is that he moved here in an era of horsepower. Essentially, buildings were being moved with donkeys and mules and horses and cables and wooden capstans. It was just as crude can be. And it has been compared to the building of the pyramids because it was just muscle and that kind of technical thing. Excuse me. So anyway, that's the important thing to understand. The vehicles to move these things came later, solid rubber tired trucks and so forth. But some of his earliest jobs, he moved the Van Nuys house in 1915, which was a 4-story, 50-foot high, 250-ton house. He moved it in 3 sections, 3.5 miles, from West 6th Street and Loma Avenue Drive to 4th and Lorraine. This was a big deal. This was a big deal, but the pictures of that move, it's horses pulling the house. It's not trucks. In the same year, E.L. Doheny paid Kress $100,000 to move an entire apartment building away from his garden, and paid him $100,000. Now, I'm not sure from the records I have whether the $100,000 included the apartment building and the move. I suspect that it did. By the 20s, Kress was at his peak. He's moving well over 250 houses roughly a year at an estimated value of well over $1 million. I mean, he was a well-oiled machine by this point. And he was also hanging out with all the literally movers and shakers of the city. I mean, he lived at the Jonathan Club downtown. Those were his pals. They also gave him a lot of work. It was also during the period where his projects started to get much bigger in scale. He moved the Alhambra Hotel, which was a concrete and steel building that weighed about 11,000 tons, and it was 6 stories. And he was very ingenious in his problem solving because he became energized when he was presented with a problem that he didn't quite know how to do. And in the case of the Alhambra Hotel, it was enormous and dead weight of 11,000 tons. So he got horses that had been trained to step high when they walked so they could step over the cables as the cables ran through these capstans to get the maximum force out of them. So he was an inventive engineer that he was just energized by the things that he did. Famous.
Can I ask Rodney, what was driving at that time? Because obviously we don't move buildings. We're certainly not moving 200 buildings a year in LA now. So what was driving it? What was happening to LA at that point in time?
It's a very simple answer. Buildings that were zoned for single family suddenly became zoned for multifamily. So people found themselves sitting on very valuable dirt. And so you had developers and builders coming to these homeowners and saying, I'll give you X for your lot. And that was enough money, believe it or not, to pay Kress to move the house and buy another lot and still have a little money left over. So it was incredibly enticing to people because they would move away from the congestion of the city. Perfect example of that is the Verbeek Higgins house that was on Wilshire Boulevard. That was a very famous 10,000 square foot Victorian that was on Wilshire Boulevard. Kress cut it in 2 pieces, and that's an example of people having a party in the house. That was well covered by the local papers, and even the mayor of Los Angeles was in the house at the party. But that was publicity. For Kress, that was just the way he marketed his business. He moved at the same period, and you showed a picture of it. There was an 80-foot greenhouse, glass greenhouse. He moved for Arthur Leitz, and he moved it into Westwood, which we believe is the greenhouse at the Playboy Mansion. There's something about moving an 80-foot glass house down Sunset Boulevard that is kind of mind-boggling. But his projects, as the 20s moved on, became bigger and bigger. I think because he liked the challenge. When he moved the Aronson house, let's see if I can get that up there.
Yep.
Okay, the Aronson house is a 40-room house on Wilshire that he moved to Fremont Place. Took him 6 weeks, 3 nights to do it, okay, because you couldn't block the street. There's one of the 3 sections. And if you look very closely at the bottom under the cribbing, you see a guy standing, so that gives it scale. So he was really working on this massive scale now. I mean, these just gigantic things that no other house mover would touch. That's just who he was.
Can you talk, and then we'll quickly kind of transition to kind of what's happening today. But, obviously he had a period where he was very prolific in what he was doing. Why did that end? And then also, how did you become the recipient of the archive? How does that happen? Did you know a lot about a gentleman that most people don't know his name, and they should?
Well, they should, right. Well, his active years were literally from the year he landed in LA in 1915 until the end of the Depression. Things were slowing down and World War II was starting to happen. It's about 1940. So his 25 years, but in 25 years, he moved hundreds and hundreds of buildings and houses, apartment buildings, high schools. He moved 4 different high schools: Compton, Gardena, North Hollywood, and Orange. I know that the North Hollywood is still being used today. It's a concrete building. He really changed the built landscape. He really did. The problems became multiple. It was more congestion, overhead power lines, all kinds of things, more bridges, overpasses, and stuff. Unionization became a big problem for him because he was used to his company doing everything: electrical, plumbing, all of it. He would move your house, set it all up again for you. Unionization. The Depression finally caught up with him in the sense that there was less money. People were spending less money on big projects like this. But he built his own home at the height of his career when he was fully flush. I didn't know who George Kress was. I had no idea. I don't think anybody else did. When I bought the only house that he ever built, nobody knew one single thing about the building. Nobody knew who built it. Nobody knew the history. I started restoring it, and in the process of restoring it, I was sort of struck by this was not an ordinary building. I then learned that it was built by George Kress. Well, what Kress did, everything he knew about engineering, he put into this building he was building for his family. So the building is, believe it or not, it is over code today. It is unbelievable. Unfortunately, he lost it at the end of the Depression, about 1939. To keep his payroll for his company going, he took a loan out against the house and then couldn't make the payments. And so by spring of 1940, he lost it. I tracked down his daughter, who was still alive. And amazingly enough, his daughter had been hanging on to all of his documents, the blueprints for the house, his entire archive of his moving career. And then she and I wrote the application for the National Register because I wanted to preserve it. And we put his name on it because it was his house. That's the short version.
Appreciate it. No, thank you. And thank you for taking care of the house and also the archive, which really does help us understand kind of how LA has changed, and knowing that maybe the house that you love, maybe it didn't start where it is today. And that's part of the story of LA. Things do get moved around, which kind of brings us to where we are today. And I want to invite the rest of the panel to join us in terms of completing kind of where we started, where we are today. So I'm going to invite Brad to go ahead and turn on your camera. Brad, again, is a preservationist. He's an old house lover. He's an experienced mover of many older homes. I don't know how many you've done, Brad, but this is not your first rodeo in terms of being involved in this. We have Evan Chambers, who is an accomplished artist. He's from Altadena, lost his home, sadly, in the fire. And he's one of 2 initial homeowners that have come forward to want to take these houses and move them. And he's looking at the Taft Avenue house in terms of his future home. So please join us if you're able. Evan, he's actually on site right now because a lot's happening at his future home. And then last but not least is Morgan Sykes J. Bush. He is the creative director at Omgivning Architecture. He's really the man behind the vision of the historic house relocation project, and this idea of putting in place a plan to move these at-risk houses and, make them match up with homeowners that want them in Altadena. So welcome everybody. And maybe Morgan, we start with you since you're on site. If you want to show everybody what's going on at the Taft Avenue house. I don't know if the porch is moving yet, but if you want to show us a little visual, that would be great. And you're still on mute.
The porch is not moving yet, but it's just about to. So I can just kind of show you what they're doing. They are doing some additional bracing so that the front porch can be lifted off. So it'll probably be moving in a few minutes. So I can check back in when that's actually happening.
Great. Well, let me start with you, Morgan, because you were the first person to ask this question. Why can't we relocate houses that are about to be demolished? And it's a question like, we've talked about earlier. It's surfaced many times in LA and in recent years. And in most cases, the dilemma of is where do you move them to? There's no available land that's affordable. So it becomes kind of unsolvable or impractical to actually move these houses, and we see perfectly good older and historic homes demolished over and over again. So how did this all come together, and the idea of starting the historic house relocation project?
Yeah, sure. So I was in a board meeting with the Santa Monica Conservancy at the beginning of February, and City of Santa Monica sends automatically all of the houses that have applied for demo permits every week. If it's over 40 years old. So we take a look at those just to see what's going on. And there were a lot of houses that particular meeting that were not historically designated, but were just great, sweet houses. And there was nothing we could do about it. And it made me, really sad that you see it all the time driving across the city, but it's different when you see a whole long list all at once. And then the next day I was in a meeting with at Omgivning. Oh, you know what? I'm going to pause because it looks like they're moving it right now.
Oh, exciting. We did not plan this. It just happened.
No.
So we're happy to be able to make this part of the program to see house moving in real time.
Well, I guess as it's going, I could continue what I was saying.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, so we at Omgivning started a handful of architects that were all trying to figure out exactly what the county was going to require for the rebuild efforts, just so that we could all share our information. When somebody learned something, then we could share it with each other. And there was somebody talking about doing prefab housing. And so it just hit me like, a lightning bolt, like, well, why couldn't we do what the city, what we used to do in LA all the time, which is relocate houses? Could we take some of these houses that are about to be torn down, that are not officially historic, but are still great houses, and relocate them? And, then I called the director of the Santa Monica Conservancy. I called you. I called just a handful of people that I knew to see, get their opinions on it. And simultaneously, Evan and his wife, Caitlin, had seen this particular house get posted on Before the 101 Instagram account as being threatened, and they had the same idea. And I think they started talking to people they knew. So within 2 days, we got connected through mutual friends. And then eventually I got introduced through Evan to Brad Chambers, who has, well, he can tell you what he's done, but who has really been teaching us how to do this and been our advisor the whole time. So I would say, it's not just me. Like, we couldn't have done it with all of these characters or players in this adventure, let's say.
Yeah, it definitely takes a team. Well, maybe that's a question, Brad. Can you, while we're looking at this, and it's great to be able to have a visual here, and hopefully you can all see the large screen of this now. Can you talk a little bit or walk us through a little bit, like, why is the move happening in this way in terms of kind of a little bit of deconstruction, a little bit of separation of these building elements versus some of the earlier examples where you saw the entire building being moved down the street? Like, why is it being done differently today, and why is this necessary, just so people understand kind of the methodology behind the moves here?
Yeah, the two driving forces are, one, efficiency. There's enormous time component and time pressure with each of these. And the second is really just ease of getting it through the city and all of its infrastructure. And so on our first effort, we were dealing with some constraints on limited width on the streets, together with tree canopies, traffic signals, utility lines, et cetera. And so with our building team and our engineers, we determined how we could actually cut these houses into multiple pieces, making them or making their transportation much more efficient across the city. And so that's really what's going on here. It's also what this does, what we're doing here is it allows us to go longer distances. So if you reflect back on Rodney's comments, these would travel oftentimes maybe a few city blocks. And in certain cases, he mentioned one that traveled, I think, 3 miles, which is quite a distance for an entire house. By cutting them, it allows us to go long distances from Santa Monica to the Palisades. It could go from Santa Monica to Bakersfield because we cut them in dimensions such that you can clear most of the city's infrastructure.
And Brad, you've moved, I don't know, 5 or 6 houses as part of your own project. Can you talk a little bit like where did those houses come from and how did you, what was the bug that bit you to decide that you wanted to move houses and also train a crew to be able to do this and put them back together?
Sure. So I was in Northern California and I came to LA. I was a banker was my day job, and I arrived in LA not knowing much about LA. I was officing downtown, and I would drive around, and I became familiar with all the manifold complexity of LA and its neighborhoods and how they all grew from downtown and all the varied architecture. And in time, just through kind of neighborhood stalking, I saw houses that looked like they were at risk, they were under invested in, or there were apartment buildings going up and whatnot. And it dawned on me that it would be amazing to save these homes. My focus was the ones that were more at risk, and that was a lot of the working class, and particularly the old Victorians. Most of the stuff that we focused on has been in the some in the 1870s and some in the 1880s. And so we did our first one. It was such a adrenaline rush. It was also one where we cut it into, actually that one we cut just the second floor off of it, and the first floor, it was in Chinatown, way up hill on Hill Place. And we successfully moved it, and it was a complete adventure. And for anyone doing this, I mean, I think it starts with really having, an inspiration to save an old home, and the ability, to appreciate kind of the unknown and an adventure. It was all of that. It gave us all of that. And then the completed project gave us an enormous amount of confidence that we could do more of this.
Yeah, definitely. It's not for everyone. And I'm guessing right now, Evan, as the future homeowner of this house, this is a little nerve-wracking moment right now because I'm feeling it just watching this porch, and hoping it all stays together as it gets relocated. I'm going to switch back to Morgan because I have a feeling Evan is maybe tied up a little bit here. But Morgan, can you talk a little bit about how you all have been trying to match, or one, to locate the houses, as well as, obviously some people, Caitlin and Evan came forward with this house, but how is that happening? Talk a little bit about that process, and we'll talk more a little bit later about how people can get involved if they want to either sign up to try to get a house or they want to donate a house. But can you talk a little bit about how this has come together kind of organically, and what you're thinking in the future for this project?
Yeah, that was Evan that just walked by the way, in the shot.
Okay.
You're right. It did happen organically. It did start with those, handful of Santa Monica houses that I was talking about, and then this house. And then from there, I started talking to just all sorts of different people that I know that are in this world, historic preservation, specialists, people from different cities, city agencies. The folks at Esotouric have really given me a lot of tips to different houses that they're aware of that have applied for demo permits. And then, once that started to happen and we started talking to the developers, some of them have been, not as interested in helping us, but others have said things like, oh, yes, you can have my house, and I've got 3 more that I'm working on that you might be interested in. So that really has grown to about, I think we're at about 80 houses right now that we put together on a list that we've been tracking and trying to match up with people. And then in terms of how we are matching them up with families, that also just started word of mouth from Evan, introducing us to other people that he knew in Altadena. And then, you know, friends of friends. So that started to grow. And then in the past couple of weeks, when there has been some press that came out about it with KCRW, LAist, and on the news, we've gotten a huge amount of people that have expressed interest. So now we are internally scaling up so that we can start to be able to help everybody and match as many families up as we can with houses.
Yeah, and we will put it in the chat shortly, or I'll ask one of my colleagues to put that in if you have that. If not, I can do it. But we've got the direct links to Omgivning's website. So if you're, interested in wanting to receive a house, to relocate it to your property in Altadena, or you want to donate a house, there are forms you can sign up to kind of start the process. The other thing that maybe Brad or you can talk about is this is a very skilled, as you can see in person as we're looking at this live, is it's not every contractor has the skill set to be able to do this. It's something you really need to learn. And there's not enough folks out there that have this skill. And I know Brad's really trained some folks that have been really helpful on these first two houses. But my understanding, Morgan, is that you're trying to find more people that could, more crews to be able to do this so that you can scale up to meet the need. Is that accurate? And feel free, Brad or Morgan, to talk a little bit more about kind of the skills needed for this.
Yeah, I mean, I'll let Brad talk about the skills, but yeah, that's absolutely correct. Brad and his crew have been incredible in working on these first two houses, and he may be anxious to have his crew back to work on his own projects coming up soon. So we've been talking with him and with other starting to move with a handful of other general contractors and demolition specialty contractors to be able to do future houses for people.
Yeah, I think it's a mindset shift for most builders. They're used to working with new materials, some design plans, etc., and starting from foundation and going upward. And this is a bit of the reverse. This is going through a process of deconstruction. You're working with old materials. Some folks don't really like that because you have to, there's a level of abatement that goes on to deal with the contaminants. And then, old wood has got splinters, et cetera. So there actually really is a mindset shift. Most carpenters, when they spend time with this, they can master it fairly easily relative to their trade skills. But I think it is more of an education. I think there hasn't been a need. And the need hasn't been there, as Rodney touched on, because we're dealing with scarcity, but those scarcities are now changing. Building costs are going up. Land is becoming more available. There wasn't land before. And so if it wasn't land, you really couldn't move. But now with the Palisades and with Altadena changing that dynamic, it may call into to this industry as one of being very viable. And hopefully things like this create an awareness, and other contractors see this as an ability to not only be, somewhat noble in what they're doing, but also, relative to their business plans.
Yeah. And I will just stress again, just remind everyone that, moving a house is always the last resort. We work really hard to save houses and keep them where they're at. But because LA being LA and what it is, and redevelopment and some of the pressures that exist, we don't always have the available tools to keep them. And so rather than them being demolished, this is a perfect way to have them ensure that they are maintained, reused, take on a new life. In this particular case, they're actually serving a really critical need in terms of being able to help homeowners that lost their houses in the fires, and to, put those neighborhoods back together, which is really exciting in terms of this work. Can either Morgan or Brad, and I don't know if Evan's still busy, but feel free, Evan, if you are available to chime in. We've got questions for you too, but my guess is you're in a little panic mode at the moment. But Brad or Morgan, can you talk a little bit more then about once you put the houses into the pieces and you're putting, you know, the ideas to transfer them on their journey to their new location many miles away, what are the challenges that you're encountering there in terms of permits, getting approvals, in terms of taking these pieces onto the road? How challenging or complicated is that in terms of that process?
It is, the private sector side is pretty straightforward. If you get into each one of the trades, so the moving companies, in this case, a craning company, builders, carpenters, etc., you know, there's those resources are readily available. What's complicated and most difficult is there are enormous, generally, time pressures on these projects. A developer has plans to put, in these cases, a multifamily development in place. And it's really, they're facing their own pressures with their investors to get going on that. And so they're not able to give much time on getting these things moved. Successfully, if everything's going great, it takes about 7 to 8 weeks to get these prepared for moving and then moving and through the permit process. The biggest friction area is actually the process of educating the city on all its various departments that touch this type of effort to get the permits. So you're really working with the building and safety departments of these cities. And then in this case, you're working with public works of 5 different cities because it actually crosses 5 different cities. So you have to get their sign off. And then there is a bit of a planning component, particularly if it's going to a historic neighborhood, to make sure things like, you know, it achieves it has success with its compatibility studies and appropriateness studies that many of the cities require to bring a historic home into a historic neighborhood. The more that we can iron that process out and have it, you know, where things are, you know, more routine, that'll take an enormous amount of time and therefore time pressure out of this. But that is probably the biggest friction area, is having all the departments within the cities work together and increasing their knowledge on this type of activity.
Well, this is super exciting to be able to see these images. Rarely do you see this, let alone as part of a program like this, in terms of a porch just lifted off a house like this, and it actually miraculously is fully intact, which is very cool to be able to see. Morgan, can you channel Evan a little bit for us, and or Brad either, and share a little bit, like, what is it about this homeowner that really wanted this house? The same goes for the Craftsman house on St. George, in terms of what was that process like, and kind of the matchmaking, but also, you know, the willingness to step up and make the commitment. And I think that's Evan there in the middle of the picture with the hat on, with the white shirt. So he's probably very proud to see his porch land safely.
Yeah, I think he is a little bit occupied at the moment.
For good reason.
Because he's been very hands-on in this whole process, which has been amazing. Maybe I could channel just what he's told me about how he, you know, came to choose this house. We did start talking about this back in February, and he went with his wife Caitlin out to look at a bunch of the houses that we had put on our list at that time. And at that time, I think there was, you know, 10 or 12. And they kept coming back to this one as the one that felt like the right fit for them. So we looked into it a little bit more, and we saw that I happened to know the entitlement consultant that was working with the developer on this. And I just called him up and said, would you be interested in relocating this, or allowing us to relocate it in lieu of demolition? And he said yes. Just in a 5-minute conversation, he gave me the house. So that's how it came about.
What about the St. George property? Because that's a little bit different scenario, and it's a much larger house.
Yeah, this house is, I think, about 2,400 square feet, built in 1911. The St. George house, that was on a few people's radar. before the 101 account holder, Kathleen Perricone, was the one that told us about it, but also Esotoric had talked about it before. Anyway, we talked to that property owner, and it was not as easy of an arrangement with them, but we did find a way to come to an agreement. They were on a much tighter timeline, so they were requiring us to get the house off the property by today. It's the last day that we have. But it looks like we're gonna actually be moving that house starting on Monday. So a little bit past our time frame, their time frame that they gave us, but
Great.
yeah.
I'm going to switch to some of the questions because we're coming close to the end here. Thankfully, the porch got moved and settled before. But I guess one thing I would put out to those tuning in, and hopefully maybe there's people that are tuning in or watch this later that are thinking about donating a house that they're already planning to demolish. And I would encourage you, one, to reach out to Omgivning or the Conservancy or any of the people that are working on this to start a conversation about that. Because we want to be helpful and to save these houses. I've worked in other places where we've moved houses where the house was donated and some of the costs that otherwise would have been incurred for the demolition were put into that to help with the relocation. So we want to look at lots of different scenarios to try to save more of these houses and make it as financially viable as possible, because obviously there's cost here. And that's one of the questions that's come up a couple of times, and Brad or Morgan, if you can talk a little bit more about this. How does it compare in terms of relocating the houses in the manner that you're dealing with both of these houses and those in the future, in comparison to somebody that would just be building ground up new construction on their site in, let's say, Altadena? Do you have a sense of that yet? And also, how much quicker will this be potentially than, doing the traditional building a new house?
Morgan, would you like me to speak to that?
Yes, please.
Yeah, it's the question that one's mind. I think first of all, I'll go backwards on how I answer it. You only do this if you're passionate about a house. I don't think the reason you do this is because of cost or anything that matter, because there's so many more dimensions to this. Now, what you get for it, the quality of the build, the quality of the house, its historic energy, is remarkable, and is a great motivator as why you do this. But in terms of costs, there are a number of layers to that as well. So in the case of these houses, the developer had demolition permits to demolish them, and had only one motivation, and that was to get rid of the houses. And so there was really no ability for these folks to negotiate any level of assistance. In certain cases where houses are protected within the city, and so the developer is not able to tear them down, but the city is open to them being relocated, you can have a polite conversation with the developer, both on terms of time to get it off because they can't demolish it, so they're very thrilled that you're there, and also some level of reimbursement for some of the costs. So it's a different conversation in both. Obviously, if you have reimbursement taking place, that offsets some of your other building costs. And then as it relates to building, in our case, we're able to do it relatively efficiently because the team works directly with our family. So we are the owner builders of our projects. We keep them in our own portfolio. Once you bring in for many folks that don't have a set of builders or folks that they've worked closely with that they can hire directly, you're working with a contractor. And in that case, there's going to be different layers, of cost. In our cases, we built them at or under what it would take for new construction. And then when you take the quality aspect of it, it's just an exceptional win. But I think if you're involving a contractor, I think it's going to be very case by case on the complexity of the house, the site where you're moving it, et cetera, that will really determine that. But you're going to be, in my judgment, you're going to be at or, potentially, 30, 40% more than a new move or a new construction, depending on the contractor that you hire.
And then can you speak, the other question that's come up multiple times is, one, we're talking about multiple jurisdictions here, so the city of LA and then county of Los Angeles. How well are they working in concert in terms of coordinating this? Are those jurisdictions waiving fees or helping to make it streamlined in terms of moving these houses? They're not exactly the same size of what was there before, so they may be a little larger than the house that was lost to the fire. In terms of that process. And then the other component to that that has come up is, how well are these going to be dealing with in terms of compliance with fire safety or any new regulations that might exist? Or is there a need for any type of adaptation or retrofitting of these houses to meet, current codes, whether it's fire or other, life safety, energy codes that may be associated with this, which I know is a lot of things I just threw into that question. So I don't know, Morgan, if you want to take a first stab at that.
Yeah, I can cover that part. We had all the same questions when we started this, and we went to the county help desk that they have set up to try to get those questions answered. And to be honest, the supervisors there didn't totally know. And to be fair, this isn't done that often, so how would they know? But I got myself introduced to the head of the planning department and the head of public works, which is building and safety in the county. And we did determine what's required. There's a chapter in the California existing building code, chapter 14, which is about relocating buildings. And we got them to confirm that the only thing we need to do is a new foundation that's to current code. And we have to comply with current zoning code. So that means setbacks and height limitations. Then if we are moving a house from a different seismic or wind load zone, we would have to do local structural strengthening. So far with these first two houses, we're not in a different seismic or wind load zone, so no improvements there. And then those are the only things that we're required to do. We are, we can opt to do additional things, like you can see maybe in this porch that's been lifted, you can see there's some screens for the attic vents. So we could improve those to be more fire resistant. That's an easy, cheap thing that we can do. There's other things that we can do if we decide to, but they're not required.
Yeah, one of the things that we've done on ours, just for safety purposes, is that made them seismically and structurally enhanced, which is fair when you have it at this stage. It's just a natural thing to do. There's energy efficiencies that you can add. Obviously, insulation. Most of these homes didn't have insulation, and matters like that. Obviously, the foundation is being built, so it'd be built to current code. But while you have it open, it's the perfect opportunity to make those enhancements and ultimately just have a better house.
Yeah. A couple other questions, and I also have a question for you, Rodney, so stay tuned. But someone's asking, are any of the houses that you're looking at, the pool of houses potentially that would be demolished, are any of those more mid-century style homes where you've got a lot of glass? I think people are curious in terms of what's the range of types of homes, where obviously we're talking about two similar kind of craftsman style houses here for the first two, but does it run the gamut of all kinds of styles that are potentially in that pool of 80 houses or so that you're looking at?
Yeah, I would say it runs the gamut, just as the greater Los Angeles does architecturally. So we do have a handful of craftsmen, some Tudor houses, quite a few like 1940s wartime bungalows. It's quite a range. I don't think that we have a lot of mid-century, but I believe there are a couple.
One of the key considerations is the site that it's coming from. So a residence that's on a very steep hillside are very difficult to move. Involves a lot of craning, but the best candidates are one that have a somewhat level lot. You can get all the equipment in.
Makes sense. I'm gonna took off the spotlight. So Morgan, if you want to come back on camera at some point here, but a question for you, Rodney, that someone was asking about George Kress and the Kress House Moving Company. Are there any examples where they attempted to move something and they failed that you're familiar with, or was he successful in everything he did? But I know he was quite the showman and promoter, so maybe he never promoted the failures.
Well, let's put it this way: if there were failures in his career, he did not document them, and he did not leave a breadcrumb trail of failures. He only left a breadcrumb trail of his successes. I just want to point out, though, that what's interesting here is that here was a guy who literally changed the built landscape of Los Angeles, changed it. And we're still enjoying many of the buildings that he moved. So he was a preservationist by default, but he died without even an obituary in the LA Times. He was a completely forgotten guy. And I like to think that I've kind of resurrected him a little bit. Because we're still enjoying the fruits of his efforts in the city today.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's a good point to maybe wrap up on, because that's really the heart of why we do these programs and why it's called People Plus Places, is that it's about highlighting the stories about people that have made contributions to LA and making sure their stories are told. Speaking of, we have Evan on screen here. So we need to hear, before we leave, we need to hear from the homeowner that's willing to take this incredible risk and is doing this. So hi, Evan.
Hello.
Hopefully you're less stressed at the moment because you've got your porch on safely on the ground.
Oh yeah, everything's good.
One of the questions that we had is before we leave, like, what is it that you and your partner Caitlin, what is it about this that you decided, like, let's do this, we want this, and we must have an older historic home, and again, very sorry for your loss of your house that you had before, so what is it that motivated you, so we understand it better?
I mean, I grew up in Pasadena and Altadena, and my parents back then bought a really beautiful craftsman home for $30,000, and my dad stripped all of the wood, so we always had beautiful wood to look at, and this home kind of reminded me of that. But yeah, I'm 44 now, and I've seen a lot of houses all over LA get demolished, and it's always sad. And in Pasadena too, Pasadena tries to do a good job, but they've lost a lot of homes. And I don't think anybody likes that. And so this is kind of a way to combat that sadness, And but yeah, this house, it's just a beautiful house. I looked at a lot of different homes, with Brad, we crawled around a couple pretty gnarly ones down in South Central, it was fun. But we just kept coming back to this one, like, yeah, this one's great. And the developer came around and got on board. Plus, this one's just full of all this beautiful Doug fir. It's all painted right now, but you strip it down and yeah, it's just a beautiful house. I think it's important to kind of like fall in love with it because it is a project.
Well, we're happy you fell in love with this house. It is a
Yeah.
very sweet. I've been through it, and it's going to be lovely. I guess the last question that probably everyone's asking: when do you expect to have your house back together in Altadena? Do you have a kind of a targeted time frame?
I think within a year or less, because like once it's on site and back together, you're just restoring an old home, which a lot of us have already done, So yeah, we'll see. It also depends on the availability of the crews and, how fast permits get, passed and all that stuff. But so.
Well, on behalf of the Conservancy and everybody tuning in, thank you for taking this on. Brad was absolutely correct. This isn't right for everybody. You've got to really love the house and want to do it. But thank you for doing this. And hopefully maybe when the house is done,
Sure.
We couldn't have a party in the move because you're in sections, but maybe we can have a party in your house once it's done, if you'll have us over. But
For sure.
Thank you for doing this. And like all good things, they have to come to an end. We're at the end of our time, but sorry we couldn't spend more time with you, Evan, but you were obviously very busy. But thank you, Evan. Thank you, Brad. Thank you, Rodney. And especially thank you, Morgan, for like taking the leadership and creating and Omgivning architecture, creating the historic house relocation project. Feel free to reach out. I know it's in the chat, but feel free to reach out to Morgan. If you can't find Morgan, feel free to reach out to us. We'll match you up. If you have a house that you'd like to donate that needs to be demolished, not just because you want to demolish it, but we'll work on that. Or if you're looking for a house, we'll all help in terms of the matchmaking. In terms of this, it's an exciting, innovative approach in terms of getting people back into houses and saving houses that otherwise would be lost. And we'll be telling more of the story about George Kress and the Kress House Moving Company to make sure that that gets out as well. But thank you, everybody, for being part of this. And tune in. It'll be on our YouTube page very soon. And last but not least, join us at the Conservancy, become a member, and help us save more historic places. But thanks, everybody. And we'll keep you posted as more houses are moving to a new location and taking this journey. So thanks again, everybody. Have a good day.